You know, Monster Hunter Stories 2 Wings of Ruin isn't being talked about much right now, and I think it has to do with the lack of recent information about the game. So what better way to keep talking about the game than by sharing wish lists for the game? I am Reaverjolt, and this is the top 5 things I really want for Monster Hunter Stories 2. Now before we get started, I want to mention that the things I want on this list are not confirmed or likely to be in the game once it releases. With that out of the way, let's get into the video. What I would like for number 5 is for weaker MONSTIES to be available early on. Now you guys might be saying, what are you talking about? We had early game weak MONSTIES in the first game. While you are right, the first game did have some pretty weak MONSTIES, most of which you can't even get in the early game. The fact that they are only available in the later game makes them much less likely to be used for most of the players, especially since there are better options. The biggest example is Mount Celion, a late game area that you get to just before you face the final boss, and you can find Jade Barroth and Great Baggy, two monsters that aren't all that useful in the endgame, especially in the stat department. Having these MONSTIES be obtainable earlier in the game instead of later in the game would make more sense in my opinion. Now what I would like to have for the number 4 spot is to have starter MONSTIES to choose from. This might be on the edge of being more like a Pokemon game, but hear me out. In the first game, the only monster you started with was Velocidrome. You didn't really have options at all when starting out. While that does separate stories from being more of a Pokemon type game, it still would be nice to have choices of MONSTIES at the start of the game to choose from. The MONSTIES you choose from don't have to have a weakness triangle either, although if there were to be one, it would be the Fated 4 in terms of their weaknesses. Glavenus would be good against Gammoth, Gammoth good against Astalos, Astalos good against Mizutsune, and Mizutsune good against Glavenus. This is an example of a perfect weakness circle. It doesn't have to be the Fated 4, mostly because they'd be a bit too good early on. However, I really tried to find an early game alternative to the Fated 4 weakness circle. I just couldn't find it. So unless they add a growth system of some kind by level up, in which case the Fated 4 would be a perfect starters, they could set it up without a weakness circle at all and just go with either the drones as starters or the beast trio being Arzuros, Legambi, and Volvidon. I really don't see this being a thing as Stories 2 is not trying to be like Pokemon, but it would still be cool to choose a MONSTIE to start with. For number 3, I want the monsters from Monster Hunter Rise to be available as MONSTIES. The reason for this is because when Monster Hunter Stories 2 comes, there will be compatibility features between the two games. They didn't give any details, but they did say that compatibility will be a thing. So what I'm hoping they do is have events that allow you to obtain the new monsters that are introduced in Monster Hunter Rise, and add them into Monster Hunter Stories 2 as MONSTIES. Examples being the new flagship Magnamalo, Agnesom, Tetranodon, and Great Izuchi. If there happens to be a new monster in Rise that becomes a new favorite, I would 100% have it as a MONSTIE. Next, what I would like for number 2 is a lot more stuff to do in the end game. In the first game, you beat it, and afterwards, there's some stuff you can do like collect every single MONSTIE, gene combining, Tower of Illusion, Labyrinth of Ordeals, hunting a few Elder Dragons, and online battling. But there's not really much to do after that. So what I would like to see is a possible second main story, or a possible expansion that adds a G rank of sorts. Mostly because the first game didn't have a G rank. It just went up to high rank after beating the game. We could probably have a breeding system or something like that, or maybe a super gene system, not too sure. I don't have a whole lot of ideas here, so if you guys have any ideas for how they could go about the endgame, let me know in the comments. And for the number 1 spot, I want every single monster in Monster Hunter Stories 2 to be available as MONSTIES. I don't think it's gonna happen for every single MONSTIE, but for me, it was frustrating when I found out you couldn't get Ignactor of all things as a MONSTIE. Now I know there's gonna be a comment saying, it's against the writer's code to write something with a spine like Ignactor, but let's take a trip to Monster Hunter Generations. In that game, you indeed can mount Ignactor. Now look closely at the hunter on the Ignactor. He's not on the spine, he's on the side of the back. So wouldn't it make sense to have a saddle on one side of Ignactor's back? I mean, come on! We have Lagiacrus as a MONSTIE who has spikes on his back, and yet there was a workaround there for its saddle. Yes, I know I'm nitpicking, but the point is, I would like to see every single monster in the game have a MONSTIE available. It may not happen, but a man can dream. And that's it. That's the list of things I really want for Monster Hunter Stories 2. Let me know in the comments what you guys want for the game. And with that said, thank you very much for watching. Consider liking the video and consider subscribing to keep up with my uploads. Be kind to one another and have a most wonderful day.